Factor by grouping is a strategy that can be used to factor polynomial expressions consisting of an even number of terms. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to factor by grouping in polynomials with 4 terms. For our first example, we have 4x cubed minus 12x squared minus 5x plus 15. As the name suggests, we're going to group and then start by taking the greatest common factor. So I'm going to group the first 2 terms together and the last 2 terms together. So I'm going to draw a line right down the middle. Now for these first 2 terms, see 4v cubed minus 12v squared. 4 and 12, let's see, both of these are divisible by 4. And I see that both terms have at least v squared. So I'm going to take out the greatest common factor. Taking out 4v squared is going to leave behind, let's see, starting with 4. If I factor out a 4, that's going to leave 1v. And then the minus 12v squared, if I factor out a 4, that's going to leave me with minus 3. And I took away both of those v's, so just that part right there. Now we're going to come over to the second half of this problem and we're going to do the exact same thing. We have negative 5v plus 15. Both of these are divisible by negative 5. We're going to factor out a negative 5, which would leave behind just a v. And then think about the 15. If I factor out a negative 5, 15 divided by negative 5 is negative 3. Now here's the cool part with factor by grouping. I grouped it. I took out the greatest common factor, and what you see here left over is you have v minus 3 in that first expression. You also have v minus 3 in the second expression. So we are going to do one more time where we take out the greatest common factor. The first half of this problem has a v minus 3. The second half of this problem has a v minus 3. So together we are going to bring out a v minus 3. Which leaves behind 4v squared minus 5. So that is our final answer. Let's try another one. We have m cubed minus m squared plus 2m minus 2. Notice that we have 4 terms here. So this is where you want to try factor by grouping. I'm going to draw a line right down the middle, grouping the first 2 terms together and grouping the last 2 terms together. From here, I want to take out the greatest common factor. So if I look at those first 2 terms, I don't see any coefficients, but I do see that they both have at least m squared. So I'm going to put an m squared in the front, and I'm going to see what's left over. So since I started with m cubed, but I put 2 m's in the front, that's going to be 1 m left. And then here I started with m squared, but I moved the whole thing to the front. That'll be minus 1. We'll complete that same strategy on the other end. We have 2m minus 2. We see that both of these are divisible by 2, which will leave behind m minus 1, because if you divide by 2, you would be left with m minus 1. Now again, notice that the part in the parentheses is the same on both sides. So we're going to take out one more time the greatest common factor, which what they have in common is m minus 1. And if we bring to the front the part that they have in common, then we would be left with m squared plus 2. So this is our final answer. Let's try another one. Here it gets a little more complicated. We've got 5xy plus 15y squared minus 2x minus 6y. No matter how complicated it looks, I notice that there are exactly 4 terms, and if I have an even number of terms, I can cut it in half and start factoring out the greatest common factor. So for the first half up here, I see that both of my terms are divisible by 5. And I also see that they both have at least one y. So I'm going to put a 5y out in the front. If I put 5y out in the front, that first term is just going to leave me with x. And if I factor out of 5y from the second term, 15, if I factor out of 5, that leaves me with 3. And since I started off with y squared and I take 1y to the outside, that's going to leave me with 3y. We're going to follow the same approach on the other side. Negative 2x minus 6. Notice they both have a negative. In fact, they're both divisible by negative 2. They don't both have an x. They don't both have a y, so that's going to be it. Just a negative 2 out in the front. And if I pull that negative 2 to the front, that's just going to leave me with x plus 3y. It turns into a plus 3y because it started off as negative 6. And if I divide by negative 2, if I factor that negative 2, I get a positive 3y. So again, the part inside the parentheses matches. As long as that part matches, you're going to pull out what they have in common. So we're going to bring to the front the x plus 3y, which would leave behind 5y minus 2. And that is our final answer. All right, we're going to try one more. 12ac plus 4bc plus 3a plus b. So again, we see 4 terms here. We're going to split it right down the middle, grouping the first 2 together and grouping the last 2 together. In the first half, we're going to look at this and we're going to take out the greatest common factor. I see a 12 and a 4. 12 and 4 are both divisible by 4. And I also notice that both of these terms have a c. So I'm going to bring 4c to the very front. Now if I take out 4c, 12 divided by 4 leaves me with 3. And if I take that c away from here, I'm going to have 3a. All right, for the second term, I had a 4, but if I factor out a 4, I'm not going to need a coefficient anymore. I also moved that c out to the front. So that's just going to leave me with b, 3a plus b. The other side, 3a plus b. Well, they're not both divisible by 3. They don't both have an a. They don't both have a b. It actually looks like there's no common factor at all. Well, you got to remember at the end of the day, everything is divisible by 1. So even if you don't see a common factor, you can still pull a 1 to the front. 3a divided by 1 is still going to be 3a, and b divided by 1 is still going to be b. So nothing changes over here when you factor out a 1. And again, you see that the part inside the parentheses matches, so we're going to take out the greatest factor again by bringing that matching part to the front. If I bring that to the front, it's going to leave behind 4c plus 1. And that is how you factor by grouping.